Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet21 and InfoVoices, and this is one of the many webinars we do looking at some of the issues that face us in society today, whether it's locally, nationally or globally. And today we're going to look at a sort of interesting issue, and that is in any locality, there are often areas of deprivation and poverty, and there is a need to find out what the priorities in those areas are. And there's need to do that, not just for groups in those areas to deliver effectively, but also for funders to be able to direct their funds in the most effective way. And we're going to talk to Kathleen Kelley today, who is working with 6 funders to look at this problem. How do we identify need? How do we direct funding to make that need as effective as possibly in terms of satisfying it? Anyhow, Kathleen, thank you for joining us today. It's great that you're here, and I know you've got a tremendous job that you're doing. But first, can we start by asking you just a little bit about, your background and what's motivated you?
That's a big question. So where to start? So I think really my interest in kind of issues around social justice started at home because my mum was a welfare rights officer. And then personally, I'm really interested in the power of collaboration and people coming together to make change, and how you bring those different perspectives together to really understand an issue and to make change. And so I think that's what's attracted me to this role, because I think what's really lovely about my job at the moment is that I'm getting to build on lots of great strengths that people have and to work with them on the things that they want to see change. So that always gives me a lot of energy and inspiration, I think.
Okay, so that's the background, that's what's motivated you, and you've been through a whole series of jobs which are all very interesting, but you're now working on a project called LocalMotion. Now, for me at my age, that sounds like a song. Going back, I can remember it, but what is LocalMotion today to you? And don't sing, will you?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I won't sing. So LocalMotion is really the collective endeavour of 6 funders. And that's Esme Fairbairn Foundation, Paul Hamlin Foundation, Blankelly Chase Foundation, City Bridge Trust, Tudor Trust, and I've forgotten one, Lloyds Bank Foundation for England and Wales. So, and essentially what they'd really like to do is to tackle the root causes of social, environmental and economic injustice. And I think what's really important is that this is not necessarily about grant making, it's about expertise and connection to networks and building local collaboration and building on strengths, because there are 2 things that we're really trying to achieve, one of which is to enable places to find out what would be possible if funders put their collective expertise and resources to get behind the things that really matter to local communities. But secondly, to change the way funders work with places. So this is not really about grant making, it's much more about building a relationship and understanding what each adds value to.
Okay, I looked at your website, and one of the things it says on there is you're there to support local people to address social, environmental and economic priorities selected and driven locally, and drive as much learning from that as possible. Now, many people are doing that already. So what's different in your approach?
Well, I think that the main difference is that this is a collaboration of funders, and together they've come together because they can be bolder together and actually really get at the root causes. And the 6 of them together cover more of the issues that people might want. So one of the things that people often tell funders is that actually, they have to make a lot of different applications to do one thing, because, funding often is single issue and single project based, whereas this piece of work is really about trying to really understand how do people in the place work, what do they think about the issue. So it goes back to that famous Einstein quote, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes looking at the problem and 5 minutes looking at solutions. So what's really different about this is the funders wanting to really understand and work closely with places and develop together what it is we work on, rather than to come in with a ready-made list of things that they want to do. It's really about that co-creation, and that's what's really exciting, I think, about this initiative.
You're working with 6 funders, and I'm quite amazed you remember them all. When you try and do a list, you always forget one, don't you? And you think, oh dear. But you're working with 6 funders. So, I mean, are you primarily there to help different localities to decide on priorities, or to provide a different framework for funders to help local communities? I mean, what's the #1 priority for you?
Well, I think the number one priority is to really see power towards communities and to work with communities on what it is that they feel they need in towns or cities. Because this initiative was inspired by towns or cities that face those kind of social, environmental or economic injustices, but don't define themselves that way. So we're really trying to build on local strengths, and that means being responsive. But in answer to your question, I think we're there to help places, create the right conditions of change that will help them to try and work on those knotty issues that they really want to tackle, and also to bring in the relevant expertise and skills and framework that people might want to use around that. So we tend to talk about systems change, which is really a lot of jargon for saying that we're trying to really understand different perspectives and how things work in a place, so that to understand what we're all doing that create those outcomes and see what we can change. So essentially, we're trying to bring those different perspectives together to come to a shared endeavour on what it is we'd like to focus on.
Okay, well, I mean, this is the same question put in a different way. I looked on one of your funders' websites where it talked about your project, and it said we don't have the answers, and we know the the top-down approach doesn't always work, especially if it's led by funders. And the only way we can achieve what we want is by working with partners. So I'm still not sure, is the aim to develop a local funding network or a local delivery network, or to work with individual partners?
So I think we need to stand back from the funding question. So this is about all coming in shared endeavour together. So it's about understanding the problem rather than the funding leading the conversation. So it's not a funding network. What it is a kind of, we're acting our way to the future here, Francis. So we're trying to create a network of people who want to make change, because the thing about systems change is it isn't just looking at what other people can do differently, which is my experience of campaigning sometimes. It's actually about all together thinking, what are we doing that's creating those different issues? So to give you your answer, firstly, what we're doing in each of the 6 places we're working with LocalMotion is trying to understand that question about what might be possible if funders work in a different way with places, to really understand how things are now, and to agree with a network of people what's the change they want to see, and to support them with the right conditions of change. So to go back to your question and your model, essentially what we're doing is building a network of people who want to come together to enable places to work for everyone, or work better for everyone. So people in Enfield have talked to me about Enfield being the place where people can access opportunities and where they can thrive. So it's, coming together behind that shared goal and asking ourselves, what do we need to do to make that a reality?
But you're also going one step further than that, aren't you? You're saying both to local communities, or you're looking at local communities and the funders as well, to develop more joined up working together. Now, that is one heck of a challenge, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting because I think these 6 funders are very strong and very clear about their vision. And my role is essentially that kind of conduit between places and funders. And so one of the things that has been really valuable is that the funders are really keen to understand more about places and to build that relationship. So actually, I think it's something that looks hard from the outside, but like most collaborations, it depends whether people are all on the, behind the same goal. And actually, I think all of these funders are, and they're really keen to understand what matters to places and what can they do differently to help places achieve what they want. So, and I think that that goal about Enfield being the place where all residents have opportunities to be successful is something that does galvanize funders in terms of, right, okay, well, what's our role in that? Essentially what we're trying to do here is understand the funders' place in place-based change.
You say that you're a conduit, which is quite an interesting term. I suppose another term for that is a networker as well. I mean, those people are quite valuable. I'm saying you're quite valuable, you see. Those people are really valuable, aren't they? You can be a leader of a project or whatever, but people who put each other in touch with each other, who put groups in touch with each other, that's a very important thing, isn't it? And probably it's not understood in terms of its value all the time.
I think it depends. I mean, certainly it is something that people do value. And, for me, that's the way of making those connections is what makes a change. So to give you a concrete example, in one of the 6 areas I'm working in, people were talking about adult social care co-op, but in separate networks. And actually not much was happening. But once I connected those 3 different kind of groups together, then it started to make action and accelerated things. And I think that there is something around us all being collective helps us balance a bit of risk. So in another place, somebody talked about a new approach they were doing to recruitment to try and reach into communities who weren't necessarily getting access to job opportunities, and actually that sometimes you need the support. And I think that that's what the network and being a conduit does. It provides you with that support and that kind of balance of being able to test things out in a safer way, because what I recognize is that it's not always easy for people to try and take on a really difficult issue alone. So we're trying to do that together.
So, I mean, where are your priorities? Is it to deal with the total community, or the disenfranchised community, those who suffer relative deprivation? I mean, you could be working with people in leafy suburbs who like the greenbelt, or you could be working in areas where there are incinerators and it's affecting poorer communities. What are you targeting?
So we're looking across the whole of the borough of Enfield. So the way that we've approached our work is to think about the local authority districts. So what we're trying to see is where are the common endeavours, and what lots of people have talked to me about is that there are definite differences. So, you know, in Enfield, there's an east-west difference in life expectancy and attainment and all of those things. But that actually lots of communities have similar issues. So it's about drawing that together to see what are the commonalities and trying to make change across the whole borough. So we're not focusing on any one particular neighbourhood in that. We're actually thinking, what are the issues that are common across the borough that we want to change? But the main priority is that tackling the root causes of social, environmental or economic injustice. So we're trying to tackle those injustices on a local authority-wide level.
Yeah, I mean, you say right across the borough, but you also talk about, and I know your funders talk about, what is called a place-based approach. I mean, what do you think is a place-based approach? What does it mean?
Excuse me, sorry, my daughter's just saying bye-bye. So I think place is one of those terms that can be, you know, it can be bigger or smaller depending on kind of what you're interested in. So what I really like about this initiative is it's drawn around those social, environmental or economic priorities and across local authority area. So we're really being led by place on kind of what matters to them. We're not kind of focusing on any one neighbourhood or another. So the way that we've drawn the place boundary is that kind of local authority district, and actually looking at kind of how can we change systems within that. And systems are essentially the relationships between people and institutions. So actually for us in this initiative, place is the whole of the local authority district. There will be differences in different places about how people consider place, but that's what we're looking to do. And I think that what that gives people the opportunity to do is where there are initiatives that are going well in one area, but they haven't jumped, the innovation hasn't jumped to another area, we're exploring about, you know, what can be linked there to build on those great strengths. So for me, we're not narrowly defining place beyond the local authority district. What we're really saying is, what are the great things that are already going on that we can build on? You know, what is it that people want to achieve? What are the really things that they found most tricky that we could maybe help come together around? So place really is about local authority area for us. And we're kind of acting our way to the future here, Francis, and really trying to move out of the space where we can debate place for a long time, but actually we're about trying to understand, well, what are the actions that are going to help people move forward in making Enfield the place where all residents have opportunities to be successful.
But that sort of gives you a conceptual problem, doesn't it? Because most of the research I've seen on place-based approaches is micro places, they're small areas. And if you take the borough as whole as a place, it isn't really a place, is it? It's a place where there are multi places with different priorities, and tackling that is going to be incredibly difficult.
Well, I would say it is a place. It is a place. I mean, it can be made up of smaller places within that, but it is a place, isn't it? It's just a bit like you have, you know, if you think of your body as a system, you know, your heart's one part of your body, your head's another, and you've got a whole circulation system that makes all of that connect together and work. So I think of it in that way, actually. And I think that the research on place, you know, from my experience, especially at Joseph Rowntree Foundation, where we spent quite a lot of time looking into, you know, place-based initiatives versus individual initiatives, that actually place can be drawn at any different level. And I think initiatives like Donut Economics show you what can be done on a whole citywide level, like in Amsterdam. The Preston model shows you what can be done on a town model. So you can make change on a bigger scale. I think the challenge that you're pointing to, though, Francis, is that, often you need to see the whole picture of the local authority, but sometimes you need to kind of break it down to, well, what's the next right action? And often I think in the work that we're doing here, it's about, well, understanding the relationships that create the outcomes we don't want to see. So, for example, the East-West attainment gap in Enfield, it's about, well, understanding what is it in the way that we're all working that creates those outcomes that we need to try and do differently.
Okay, well, to give us some help to show what you mean, when you're developing a whole borough place-based approach, what is the process you go through to do that?
So I think, firstly, we've been through a process of a discovery phase, let's call it that, where I have lots of individual conversations with people about what are the issues from their perspective, where we talk to go to different networks and see what they're talking about, what matters to them, how are we going to connect things. So in some places I've been to lots of different neighbourhood forums to talk about that, been to forums like the Youth Forum in Enfield and others to really explore, well, what are people talking about? What issues matter to them? What are the common ground? One of the things that attracted us to Enfield was that there has been the Enfield Poverty and Inequality Commission. So that's really highlighted a sort of shared or more shared picture than there might be in some other places about what are the issues that really matter to Enfield. So, in that you can look for the common connections and then draw in a group of people together around that and saying, actually, this is what I'm hearing. How does that look? And asking them all to use their networks, because it's essentially, I suppose you're creating a network, but actually that you think of them as like the nucleus and they're reaching out to other networks and other areas, because what we're trying to do is create the right sort of messages so that you get feedback on what you're doing and you can kind of correct. And I think what's really important about this, Francis, is we don't necessarily have all of the answers to this, but what we're doing is working that out together and acting our way to the future. And while there are broad ways that you can say this is the process we've gone through, individual conversations, group conversations, a group that comes together and acts as a kind of working group to keep momentum. The individual, how we're actually doing that is relevant to the place and what are the issues that they need to tackle to get change.
Well, you talk about working together, and I know some of your trust have used the term co-designing, and that raises the question of how do you co-design and what are you co-designing?
So we're co-designing what's our shared goal. We're co-designing how do we want to work together. So one of the things that I think is really important in this work is, establishing what are our shared values, and how do we want to work together. And I think it's about being as transparent as possible and open in our conversations. So, to build that trust and to kind of have that, I suppose it's about high support and high challenge. If you were to use the team analogy you were talking about earlier, Francis, it's about really being involved and trying things. I think what we're trying to create here is, we know that we don't have the answers as funders, and, we're acting our way to the future here, aren't we? So we're trying to do things. And I think one of the things that the 6 funders can do is offer people a little bit more of a safe space to explore trying different things. And that I think has been really important to the places that I'm working with, in terms of saying that actually that gives them a little bit more security to try something different and to explore what they need to learn from that. So one of the things I really value about these 6 funders is that they know that we're going to have to try things and that things might not always work, but that they'll always be learning. And I think that ethos, that learning ethos, is really important in this kind of work.
The problem is what you co-design depends on who you co-design with. So how do you choose your co-designers?
So I think we're always conscious that we need to try and seed power closer to communities, and that actually I think one of the things that's really important about this work is you have to start where you are and then you're always trying to develop from there. So one of the things in my experience that sometimes stops great things happening is that people think they've got to have it perfect at the beginning, and actually that's, it's not a perfect world, so it's not always possible to do that. So what I try to do in the people I'm working with is explain to them that, we're starting off as a group, but we might well change depending on what issues come up. We definitely want to broaden out to our networks, and the people that are helping us kind of establish what are the priorities might not be the people that are making resource decisions, although they might be, and there might be connections between that. And one of the reasons we originally conceived LocalMotion as a 10-year initiative But lots of places with the COVID-19 pandemic were really clear that, you know, their priority absolutely had to be making sure that people were safe and well and looked after during the pandemic. So we agreed that we would have a 2-year development phase, precisely so that we could challenge ourselves on your question, Francis, and reach out further into communities. And one of the things that every area is doing is thinking now about what can they do that will develop more of a community voice and more of a community feedback mechanism in what we're doing, so that we know that what we're doing is going to make a difference to the people it matters most to.
So if you're trying to reach out to communities, how do you do that without just going through organizations? Because very often people who are in, you know, relative poverty areas don't always form organizations. They're out there, they have problems, but they aren't in organizations. If you co-design with organizations, with community, civil society groups, how do you go beyond that? How do you reach the people that very often aren't reached?
So I think that there are a few different ways. So in one area, for example, and there's no right or wrong answer, I should preface by saying that I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. I think the first thing is to be really conscious of it and to always challenge yourself around that. And so it's fair to say, you know, I'm not expecting organizations necessarily to, you know, be created from grassroots groups, although sometimes and in some places they are. What we're actually doing, though, is we can go to places where people are and reach them. Lots of places are talking about using celebration and arts and culture as a tool to kind of help people envisage what the future might look like and what steps are needed to get there. One place is working with a group of artists doing a storytelling approach, because we've got quite a few people who perhaps lead more challenging, chaotic lives who wanted to tell their story but weren't quite sure how or how it would be useful to the initiative. So they've worked with some creative storytellers and theatre people to help relay that back, and we've played that back to a wider network of people, as well as the kind of working group who are helping develop the ideas to help them think a bit differently and explore about what are the really important points for people in their lives where change has helped. And I think you know, we're always snowballing, and to be fair to organizations, actually they want to connect more to the people that they were set up to work with, and they want to connect out beyond that. And so I think, you know, people are reaching out there, and this is a problem that we've all got to explore and continually challenge ourselves on. So I think that there are more creative ways, and that's what I hope over the next 2 years we can explore more of and design more of. And, you know, it's back to that point, isn't it, that if I sat here knowing the answers, I wouldn't be co-designing and co-creating, would I, Francis? That actually that's something that we're working out with people in Enfield about what might that look like and what does that mean. So, you know, we'll definitely be, as the world opens up and we can all travel more, then, you know, we can definitely go out and talk to more people where they are. And I think that that's the really key principle, go into where people are rather than expecting them to come to you, and asking them what matters to them rather than telling them what matters to you.
You talked about connecting up, and that's a really important term. So in a way, are you trying to sort of develop networks rather than work with individual projects, because the networks have a wider reach and they're already in the business of connecting up? So
yeah, well, I mean, we haven't got a closed view of who we are and aren't working with. What we're trying to do is create a cross-sector collaboration and, you know, trying to involve those different voices. So, you know, people on the street, people from the community, people with lived experience of issues, voluntary and charitable sector organizations, public sector bodies, private sector organizations. You know, everybody has an interest in their place working as well as it possibly can for people. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're not kind of looking at any individual organization. And I think one of the things to bear in mind here is that LocalMotion as an initiative isn't just trying to say we're going to pick one project and run with that. What we're actually saying is, what are the issues people want to get behind and want to look at? So, you know, in Enfield, I'm sure everybody would agree that inequality between the east and west of the borough around, you know, life expectancy and the attainment gap is really important. Homelessness has been an issue that many people have mentioned. Improving mental health has also been a really important issue. And having no social isolation in the borough is also a really important issue. So these are things that, you know, people have actually gone out. So one of the first challenges I asked people when I brought them together was, go out and ask your networks what matters to them. What would an Enfield that looks that work better for everybody look like? And these are the issues that came back. So, it's not just kind of working with 15 people in a room, 20 people in a room, and they're the only people. It's actually using all of our broader networks and going out from there. So it's always got to be transparent and open.
So I mean, just to give you an example about the different ways of working with a network and a group. For example, you know that we're involved in a group called NCAF, which is a network of about 110 civil society organizations who look on their priority as being sustainability and climate change, because we feel that in the future that's going to be the imperative of our age. And climate justice is part of that, helping the more disenfranchised communities who will be disproportionately affected. Now, how would you set about working with a network like that as opposed to an individual group? How can you bring that into what you're doing so you have the reach that you want?
So it's an interesting question, Francis, because everybody's in more than one network. And what I say to the people I'm working with is that this is about us championing and challenging LocalMotion in our network, so that we go out and we ask for feedback. So it's about, if you think of it as like bubbles, we've invited you onto the group, you're connected to the network. So there's already a link there to explore that. Lots of the others are connected to networks, because there's a youth forum, there's a homelessness forum, there's a voluntary sector strategy group, and it's about having those connections across so that everybody is kind of informed and everybody can bring that thinking back. It isn't about, I don't think, picking one network or one group. It's about how we kind of coalesce behind those issues and see, well, what is the action that we can all take? Because one of the things that I love about this work that I think is really important is systems thinking is about looking at things from different perspectives. Systems change is about getting to the underlying causes of things. So what is it that we do or how we think that's creating some of the outcomes we don't want to see? So there is always a ripple effect there. So I'm not quite sure kind of what your question's driving at, Francis, and I'd love you to tell me more about that, in terms of, because actually some of how you work with networks and how you work with groups is dictated by what works for them as well. And so that's always a question I would ask back.
Well, that's a whole other webinar to do that, and very happy to do that, because the way networks work are absolutely fascinating. But when the theory of networking was developed in the 1980s, and a lot of people were writing about it, and they talked about nodes and all of those things within networks that they identified, a lot of people talked about, once you've created your networks, what you then have to do is network the networks. And it seems to me that's what you're trying to do, and you're sort of struggling to find a way to bring those networks together. I mean, do you see that as part of your function? Do you see that there are all sorts of networks out there and projects? We've got to some way or the other find a way of connecting them in order to achieve the priorities that you think or they think are important. Though getting the priorities is a major problem as well, because every different meeting you have will probably come up with a different set of priorities.
It's quite interesting. Well, I think there's two things in there. Well, actually, maybe there's three things. One of the things that I think is quite interesting is you've got to be agile in this kind of work. And so that while you can have a plan, I think it's dangerous to over-engineer too much, because actually some of the work is emergent. It's interesting what you say about issues, because actually we're at relatively early days in terms of having a group meeting in Enfield. And really similar issues are coming up, and the issues that have come up have been very similar to the individual conversations I've had with people and the other network conversations about what matters. So actually what I tend to find is that there are very similar issues people want to tackle. Often the issue is knowing where to start or how to start and where change comes from. And I think what's at the sort of root of what we're talking about here is that we're really trying to connect people to influence, aren't we? And people have got agency. And one of the things that's been really important in a lot of the groups about this work is that what they're saying is they're connecting people to influence and, showing people that they can have power to make change. And that, I think, is what's important about it. And that's where the connecting people to each other is what matters. And that's, while you might be saying connecting networks to networks, essentially we're connecting people, aren't we? and people are connecting us out into their wider networks. So I'm always happy to talk to others, always happy to be challenged on kind of what are the issues and what does that look like and how do we need to explore that. I think what's really important here is building that sense of collaboration behind a shared goal rather than competition. And that's what's really important here, because I think that when I talked about trying to get at the root causes, often some of the issue that we're tackling here has been that there's a lot of competition for very scarce resources, which means that people often can't get to root causes because they've got to keep tackling the symptoms of the issue. And that's what we're trying to change here, that slightly different way of thinking. But it would be fair to say that, I'm not trying to over-engineer what that looks like, and it will evolve. And, I would say it's more of a community of practice that people can come and go in. And actually it's about us wanting to make the change here, isn't it? And if networks want to be involved, I'm really happy to talk to them about what's the best way of involving them. How would that work for them? Where do we align? Where are the challenges? I think they're the really important conversations to have.
Well, you actually listed lots of things that you said that are very important. And one of those things that you said is connecting to influence. And this is my sort of penultimate question, because we're getting near the end of our time. What lots of people want to do is they want to connect together, but they want to connect together to make a difference. Now, they can make a difference by mutual aid and self-help. That's one way, and that's really important. But they can make a difference by connecting with power, the people who can make decisions. And that very often is the deficiency that exists in any areas, especially when local authorities are involved in party political bickering and so on. Making those links become incredibly difficult. Now, are you in the business of connecting networks and projects to power, and how the heck do you do that?
So it's power is a really interesting thing, and a really important conversation I'm having with groups in all of the places really about power, and it's often the case that power looks different, doesn't it, from different places in terms of so we are absolutely trying to connect people to power, and we're trying to seed our own power to help do that with people. Often some of who you think has power in their own hierarchy don't feel like they have power. So we're actually trying to create room for people to try and work in a different way. And I think one of the important things about how you do that is not creating a sense of hierarchy with the people that you're working with. So, I've worked in groups where really senior local authority staff, but they don't say their job title, they're there by their name. We use first names, and we're trying to build that relationship and that trust between people to ask themselves the question about what might it be like if we tried this differently, and just creating some room for that. So often, that's about, we see it from the outside as about power, but actually sometimes it's the relationships that shift the power, isn't it? Actually, it's relationships that shift the power, because actually the people we sometimes think have power don't have power in their own hierarchy. What we're trying to do is connect everyone behind the issue of what if we all try to do something differently? And I think that's the key to how you do it. And how you do that is getting each other to understand everyone, different perspectives, to look for where are the points where we can make change, to try that change and to learn from it, because you're trying to create there's a lot of connections, and you're trying to create something different and create the room for that to grow and for people to champion it so that you can try, because actually I think that there isn't only one right answer. The right point of intervention will be different in different places.
Okay, I mean, that again is another whole webinar, the relational theory approach, relational welfare, and all of those things that are happening now, which actually looks at how you relate to people in the right way, is something that, people are looking at. And I think it's something worth developing, and clearly you're doing it, and that's important. So, if people wanted to know more about what you're doing, or get in touch with you, or find out about the work you're doing with the trust, for example, where would they go? How would they do it?
It's a really good question. I think it's something that we need to think about a lot more, because actually we're really still in the, development phase here, and funders are making a decision on resources this summer. So what we'll be aiming to do is kind of communicate much more when we've kind of built that up and got that decision. At the moment, what we're doing is working up what do we want to say to funders, and what are we going to ask them for. And what people have been asking me for is, resource that helps them to participate in the collaboration, to try new things, to learn new things where that matters, and some help to coordinate things. So if they want to get in touch at the moment, then it would probably be through me. I'm happy to kind of share my details so that people can do that, and find out what's happening. Always happy to come back and do another webinar, Francis, too. Really happy to talk to people. And I think one of the things to bear in mind here is that I certainly don't have all of the answers, and I'm certainly not an expert in all of these things. But what I do is kind of, draw people together to work out what are people saying that we need, and I can draw in that expertise from different places. So it really is about that connection to the things that people are asking for. So happy to share my email if that would be helpful.
Okay, no, that would be, we can pass it on to people, and that's fine. Well, we sort of come to the end of our 30 minutes, and I think what you said is very interesting. I mean, I've been interested in network theory and community networks since the 1970s, when I read things like Deschooling of Society, Small is Beautiful, and all of those things that led you to think of how the community develops and how it connects together. And I get the feeling that it's taken a long time for that to explode, and for people in establishment positions to understand that is of great value, and has more power in it, really, than very often politicians who have very little power but some influence. And so what you're doing, I think, is really important, and I hope it really works, and I hope you develop that sort of networking relational approach, because that, I think, is the way things must go in the future if we're going to do things and really reach people to change their life, and for the better as well. So thank you for doing this. I think it's been valuable, and I will take up your offer to do another webinar on 1 or 2 or 3 different topics as well, because there's so much we could do. So thanks for doing it, and we'll end this interview now.